Good evening, everyone. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the Stephen Spender Trust celebration event, which includes the awards of the 2025 Stephen Spender Prize for Poetry in Translation. I'm Charlotte Ryland from Stephen Spender Trust, and this is the charity that founded the prize in 2004. That means that the prize is now 21. We've officially come of age this year, and we've marked this by focusing this year's prize on young people and their teachers. We did this because the numbers of young people taking part in the prize has grown hugely over the past 5 years, as has the number of schools taking part and the range of languages represented. This year we smashed our targets, with 75% of participating young people coming from state schools and with translations from 81 languages. This evening we'll be celebrating the winners of that prize and a lot more besides. We've known for a long time that the act of translation, especially poetry translation, is hugely beneficial to young people. It fuels their creativity, it increases confidence and self-esteem, especially for those who speak languages other than English at home. It consolidates core literacy skills, it increases enjoyment in reading and creative writing, it raises the profile of languages in schools, it breaks down language hierarchies, it supports community cohesion and well-being. I could go on. In other words, poetry translation is a pretty incredible thing. So alongside the prize, we've been working in recent years to bring this creative translation activity to as many young people as possible through in-person events for pupils and teachers. So this evening, as well as celebrating our winners and commendees, we'll also be sharing some of that work with young people and reflecting on its impact. I don't need to remind you on this dark November night that we're all going through an extremely challenging time in terms of intercultural understanding, internationalism, collaboration, empathy, but all of these are at the core of this prize. For the next hour or so, we promise to show you an alternative vision of a country that is bursting with enthusiasm for listening to and incorporating others' voices, for reflecting on what we share rather than how we differ. In this light, I'd like to dedicate tonight's event to our trustee, Alistair Niven, whom we very sadly lost in spring of this year. Alistair was hugely supportive of our youth prizes and of all our work with young people, and he delighted in the impressive readings and performances at this event every year. Alistair always contacted me afterwards to congratulate the Trust, but above all to praise the amazing young people taking part. And I think he took heart from the face of Britain that these young translators show us every year. I shall miss that conversation this year, and so I dedicate this event to Alistair's memory. At Stephen Spender Trust, we're increasingly working in partnership to reach increasing numbers of young people, and a lot of what you see tonight would not be possible without that collaboration. Collaboration with hundreds of schools across the UK and Ireland, with arts and educational organisations, and with those who fund our work. Thank you to the Old Possums Practical Trust, the John S. Cohen Foundation, and the Queen's College Translation Exchange for supporting this year's prize. And to John Lyons Charity, several universities, the National Centre for Writing, and the Welsh Government for making possible the work that we do with schools. We send our sincere thanks tonight for all this support from everyone involved. The small Stephen Spender Trust team remain the finest colleagues and the greatest collaborators of all. Stacey Allen, who leads all our work with young people and whom you'll be meeting later, and Rosie Eyre, who leads the Stephen Spender Prize. We have swelled our ranks this year, with Kerry Bevan joining our team to work on our project in Wales. You'll be hearing more about that project later. Rosie won't appear on screen tonight, but she is present in absolutely everything that you'll see here. Rosie approaches every challenge with calm commitment and great enthusiasm, and is a real pleasure to work with. I know that the audience tonight also includes many of the freelance practitioners we work with, who deliver workshops to young people and design resources, as well as our excellent trustees, including 2 new trustees who recently joined us and are clearly going to really enrich our work. Thank you to all for everything that you do to support Stephen Spender Trust. My thanks also go to Jennifer Moulds, who's been keeping you all informed about our work via social media, and Bradley Walters for creating all the videos that you'll see tonight. These are monumental efforts that all happen quietly behind the scenes, but they make this event what it is. Thank you also to Steve, who you can see beside me, providing BSL interpreting throughout all of the live sections. There's also automatic captioning available throughout the event, which you can enable or disable as you wish, and all videos will be subtitled. This year's prize has been mammoth, both in terms of linguistic scope and the number of entries. Entrants to the prize came from 235 schools across the UK and Ireland. There are 17 languages amongst the winning and highly commended poems, and well over 50 languages amongst our commendees. The languages range from those learnt in our schools to those spoken in homes and playgrounds across the UK. There is space for both in Stephen Spender Trust. Neither is privileged over the other. We're truly grateful to all the entrants for bringing these languages and poems into our orbit. For me, the Stephen Spender Prize is about inclusion and opening outwards. It shows a different version of the UK from the one that we increasingly see, and we're really glad that you're all part of that this evening. My final promise before we get started is this. The intelligence that you will see on your screens tonight is all 100% real intelligence. It is human, it is unique, it is vital. And it is vital that we continue to validate and offer opportunities for the creative intelligence of the rising generation. Thank you to all our young translators and poets for reminding us of this tonight. And we're going to hear from some of those young poets and translators now as we move on to introduce the individual youth entry. So this category of the prize is for young people who enter independently, which means they don't enter via their schools. They choose a poem and enter it themselves. It has two age categories, firstly 18 and under, and secondly 14 and under, for which there's no minimum age, so that's a really large category. It welcomes poetry translations from all languages and genres, and that's really reflected by this year's winning and commended entries, which spanned everything from Korean musical comedy lyrics to poems in languages never entered into the prize before, for example, Kazakh. I'm delighted to introduce Taher Adel, who is our judge for the individual youth prize. Hi, Taher. Thank you for joining us.
Hi,
Taher is a British Bahraini poet and spoken word artist and, as we're about to hear, novelist. I first encountered Taher when I heard him speaking on BBC Radio 4, talking about the importance of languages and translation for his own writing and his multilingual practice. And I made a note immediately I heard that. I have to talk to this person. I have to meet him. And I'm so thrilled that a couple of years later, Taher remembers a core member of the SST community and one of our returning judges. So Taher, thanks for joining us this evening. I gather that you've been busy recently with something other than poetry, which you are allowed to talk about tonight, if you like. You've been writing a debut novel. Can you tell us a bit about that experience of shifting from poetry to prose?
Yeah, sure. No, thank you firstly to Charlotte and the wider team. It's an honor and privilege to judge once again. It feels like the years gone by very quickly, but the entrants have been just as stunning. But yeah, in terms of transitioning from poetry to writing a novel, it's been a wild experience. I think the best analogy would be writing a poem is like visiting a beach, but then writing a novel is like building a beach house and staying there for 10 years, where even having breakfast in your day-to-day life, you're thinking, actually, what would the protagonist of this novel eat for breakfast? How would they eat? And what would they it is a bewitching experience. It's wholly different, but just as beautiful and rewarding. So I am very excited. It's reached a stage where there is it's in the submission stage where the agent is looking for the ideal publisher. So fingers crossed.
Okay, we'll keep us posted. Hopefully this time next year we'll be celebrating its imminent publication. Can you tell us a bit then, Taher, about your experience of judging the prize this year?
Yeah, no, this year's been different. Obviously, we don't have the open prize and category, but the quality has not diminished at all. In fact, especially with the 18 and unders, I think they've eclipsed what the adults in the previous years have managed, especially going through all the commentaries, the process, understanding it. And I feel like there's been a a contested effort in schools, whether it's the teachers or the workshops, to actually look at the process of translating a poem and how to translate a poem. And there's various ways of translating a poem, and that's what's fascinating me, just looking at the commentary, let alone the actual final translations. So I have enjoyed this year as much as previous years. But I'd say because I've gained the experience from previous years, I know what to look for and how to spot a perfect translation compared to previous years. And there's been so many perfect ones, and so many of them have not been, nominated as winners, but they are winners in my eyes because they've, done the job.
Thank you. Yeah, it's an incredibly difficult task that we're giving you. We are aware of that, and it's really nice to hear you talking as well about the sort of perceiving the influence of the teachers and when reading the commentaries. I mean, we'll be talking a lot about teachers this evening. They're absolutely key to the work that we do at Stephen Spender Trust, and interesting to hear that even in the entries that are coming in, sort of directly submitted by the young people rather than via their teachers, that the influence of the teachers is still making itself felt.
Absolutely.
So, would you like to tell us a little bit about some entries that have stuck in your mind?
Yeah, no, there's been a few. So there was one in the 18 and unders, which was Grace's ancient Chinese translation of failure. And the irony is in the name, because a lot of people have tried to translate ancient Chinese, and such a rigid and structured language to translate from, and haven't succeeded in the English language. So I felt like, this should be celebrated because it was a beautiful, beautiful translation. There's a few others like Janami's Flower Wish, and one that really stood out was Rue's Russian translation of Spinal Elia. And not just because of the creative energy that she brought into the translation, but there was also a visual interpretation, which I rarely see in a translation, where she's looked at the poem beyond the words. And I think that kind of taught me something as well, that, it can go beyond the page. A poem can be interpreted in many different ways, and that really stood out. And in the under 14s, we've had another Chinese translation, which was Pippa's Yellow Crane Flower, who decided, instead of engaging with the Lushi rhyme scheme, she'll compensate with working with the negative white space. So using, the creative endeavor to compensate. And like you highlighted before, we've had a Kazakh poem, which it's a language that has great oral tradition, not a lot of written work, especially with the poetry. So to see that being engaged with is wonderful, and just shows you that, the prize is growing, and the ideas of exploring different languages is going with that in the same direction. So there's a lot to pick from, and the commentary that will be shared at one point will go through the winners and the special commendations in more details. But there are, absolutely love this year's entries.
Thank you so much, Taha. Yeah, it's been a very impressive process to follow, and we're now going to meet the winners that Taha has, some of whom Taha has been talking about in videos that they've recorded.
My name is Mimosa, and I translated a poem from French.
My name is Oshan Gibson, and I translated a poem from Welsh.
I really like this poem because it's funny, creative, and expressive, and it makes you think a lot.
I chose this poem to translate because of the language components that are specifically only used in Welsh.
Writing Pages by Jacques Ribot. 2 and 2 is 4. 4 and 4 is 8. 8 and 8 is 16. Repeat, says the teacher. 2 and 2 is 4. 4 and 4 is 8. 8 and 8 is 16. But here comes the bird, gliding across the sky.
Spelling by Gwyneth Lewis. Your copy of Orgraff yr Iaith Gymraeg, dated 1928, brown paper case.
I am Alexander Hughes, this is my cat, and I, not cat, translated a poem from French.
My name is Janani Raghunath, and I translated a poem from Hindi.
I chose this poem because it struck me as untranslatable, owing to its reliance on the musicality of the French language and its characteristics.
I really like this poem because the flower's voice honours the sacrifices made for Indian independence, and I think that the most interesting part is the flower's ultimate request to the gardener, which to me shows the true meaning of sacrifice.
Harmony in the Evening by Charles Baudelaire. There comes a time when, quivering on their tender stems, every flower a censer sighs and fumes itself away.
The Flower's Wish by Makanlal Chaturvedi. I don't want to crown the heads of gods and flaunt my fortune. So pluck me, gardener, throw me on that path on which many of our heroes stride, and let me sacrifice my head for the motherland.
Thank you to those fantastic poet translators for getting us started this evening. I particularly enjoyed hearing Oshan talk about how he'd selected this poem because there were elements to it that were particularly Welsh, and then the Baudelaire translator talking about it feeling like an untranslatable poem. I love the way that you've risen to that challenge. We're going to come back to Oshan's translation now because we're going to look at the poem that he translated. So one of the great things about the Stephen Spender Prize we have found is that as well as unearthing the talents of the poetry translators of the future, some of whom we've just seen, it also affords an opportunity to poets writing in all languages to see their works translated into English, often for the first time. We find that the prize brings to light works of poetry that might not otherwise reach mainstream attention in English, and casts a fresh gaze on poems that original poets might never have imagined would find a new audience in translation. This process was encapsulated by Oshan, this year's 14 and under winner, whose translation of a poem by Welsh poet Gwyneth Lewis proved to the poet, as we will hear, that contrary to her assumptions, her work hadn't fallen into a black hole. In the following video, we're going to hear Gwyneth's reaction to learning that her poem had inspired Oshan's winning translation.
My name is Gwyneth Lewis. I'm a poet who writes in my first language, Welsh, and in English. And I think that translation is at the core of the poet's art. I want to congratulate the young winner who translated one of my poems. I don't know their name yet, but I'm thrilled that it's in the under 14 category. You assume that your work goes into a black hole, and it's wonderful to see somebody else catching it and taking the work on. When I was a young writer, I lived for a while in New York and attended a seminar in which Stephen Spender talked about translation, so it's a double thrill. And I've also been a prize winner myself in the competition. So I want to wish everybody who won and those who didn't win, and the organisation itself, great congratulations and deep gratitude.
Thank you, Gwyneth, for those fascinating words. I love what you said about the relationship, the kind of core relationship between translation and poetry. I think that's something that we feel very strongly at the Trust and that we see in all the work that is submitted to the prize. So we're moving on now to our school's laureate prize, which is a new category that we introduced a couple of years ago now, which is a way of supporting teachers to submit poems on behalf of their students. We found that more and more teachers were wanting to do this, and so created this category to make that possible. This year we had entries from over 100 schools and educational settings, spanning all ages from early primary to sixth form. Each school can enter up to 5 students per category, and hundreds more. We estimate between 2,500 and 3,000 young people we know were taking part in prize activities and internal competitions in their schools. We had an event also on Zoom for prize winners a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things that we asked was for them to finish the sentence, "Poetry translation is." The words that came up the most often were challenging. I think that was the winner, and I think we've already heard quite a lot about that this evening. Fun, creative, fascinating, engaging, and mind-bending. But in total, there were 34 different words that ended that sentence, really showing that poetry translation is mind-bendingly broad in its impact. We also asked our winners what their favourite thing about entering the prize was, and we had responses ranging from I enjoyed spending time with my grandma, I enjoyed translating from a language that's important to my family, to learning new words, the challenge of translating the poem accurately and creatively, and finally, being able to translate a poem into English without losing what made it beautiful in the first place. We're now going to watch a video featuring this year's Schools Laureate winners to see how they've all managed to juggle that accuracy and creativity and reimagined the beauty in the original poem.
My name is Milena, and I translated a poem from Polish.
My name is Sylvia, and I translated a poem from French.
Hello, my name is Laura, and I translated a poem from Farsi.
I received a book of Jan Brzechwa's poems as a gift from my auntie when I was little. This poem is one of my favourites.
I wanted to translate this poem because I think it's melancholy and touching and a good poem to share.
I chose to translate this poem because it is a very famous modern poem written by a well-known Iranian poet and artist.
Tattletale by Jan Brzechwa. Peter wasn't at school today. Antek made a hole in the table that was grey. Wanda stained the tablecloth. Zosha didn't clean her scruff.
In the Morning of Tomorrow by Victor Hugo. So I trudge on, my eyes seeing nothing but the fancies of my head, oblivious to my surroundings.
Sunlight, me, flower, water. Sohrab Sefehri. There's no wind. I sit on the edge of the pond. The wandering of fish. Sunlight, me, flower, water.
My name's Lou Madden, and I translated a poem from German.
Hi, my name is April, and I chose to translate a poem from the Catalan language.
Hello, my name is Ayan Alam Samad. I have brought a poem by Marxist Bangladeshi poet Nira Malendu written in Bengali.
This poem beautifully describes a serene night where nature and the earth rest in peaceful harmony.
I chose this poem because I feel that it really captures the pain and suffering that Catalans went through during the Spanish Civil War.
I decided to preserve some of the emotion present in the Bangla of this poem and also some of the language choices present.
Mondnacht by Joseph von Eichendorff. It felt like the sky above had quietly kissed the ground, so the earth and blossom light would dream without a sound.
Coranders of Exile by Periquat. One full moon night beneath her gleam, we will climb the ridge as in a dream.
Reach out your hand. Can you feel my existence? Can't you? Hold on. Let me be ready. Reach out your hand now.
My name is Sanya Buya, and I translated a poem from Bengali.
My name is Joe, and I translated a poem from German.
Rebel by Qazi Nazrul Islam celebrates the spirit of defiance and the boundless power of the human soul to rise against oppression and injustice.
I was drawn to this poem because of its similarity to other poems I have studied, such as To Autumn by John Keats, and I thought that its clear metre and rhyme scheme would be an interesting and fun challenge to translate poetically.
The Rebel by Qazi Nazrul Islam. Speak, O hero, speak with your head held high. Behold, my head is held higher than the Himalayan peak in the sky.
Autumn Day by Rainer Maria Rilke. O Lord, it's time, the summer it must go. Cast out your shadows to the parched sundials, and in the fields let great winds freely blow.
My name is Christopher, and I translated a poem from classical Chinese. So this poem, I think, offers a fascinating glimpse into the feminine perspective on grief and the spectre of war that often haunted the Tang's borders. My poem is called For Someone Far Away, and it was written by Xue Tao. Hibiscus has fallen, scattered fresh across Sichuan's autumn hills. I unfold a precious letter, a tightly sealed envelope that comes bearing only sorrow.
Well done to all of you for those fantastic translations and reflection. I think it's so amazing every year to see the range of languages and experiences and settings and contexts that come through in those poems. It really feels like the whole world is present in this event. Not everybody can be a winner, as we know, and we wish that we could include more of the wonderful translators who take part in the prize in this event. We do commend a large number of entrants every year, and all of their names are included on the Stephen Spender Trust website, as well as being shown on the screen at the end of today's event. So do keep watching right until the end to see the names of our fantastic commendees. No prize would be complete without its judges. And this year, alongside Taher, we were thrilled to welcome 4 current students and recent graduates from the University of Oxford as judges for the Schools Laureate Prize. These judges came to us via our sister organisation, the Translation Exchange at the Queen's College in Oxford. The Translation Exchange is a project that raises the profile of languages nationally, and one of its main programmes is Creative Translation Ambassadors. Students at Oxford, as well as other universities, are trained, initially by members of the wider SST community, to design and deliver creative translation workshops at schools. This is all about giving students the opportunity to share their love of languages and international literature with the next generation, and it now reaches about 2,000 pupils every year. This year, we were really pleased to bring these the Translation Exchange ambassadors into the Stephen Spender Prize. And in the video to come, we're going to hear from them about their experience as judges and about their thoughts about being languages students.
My name is Josephine, and I have studied French in Oxford. Languages have always been a part of my identity. As I was bilingual in French and Polish ever since I learned to speak. And moving to the United States at age 10 allowed me to learn English and Spanish as well. I think there's something so fulfilling in reading your first book in a foreign language or having your first conversation in a foreign language. When you start understanding a language, it feels like you're one step closer to completing the puzzle of the universe, of life.
My name's Pat, and I studied French and Polish at the University of Oxford. Growing up trilingually, speaking English, Welsh and Polish both at home and at school, I was constantly surrounded by languages. Given that these 3 come from completely different language families, code switching became somewhat of a second nature to me and really opened up the door to continue learning more. Today, I can speak 6 languages, and through those, I've had the amazing opportunity to extensively travel and work across 3 continents, connecting meaningfully with local speakers in their native languages.
I'm Bryony. I was one of the judges for the Key Stage 4 section of the Stephen Spender Prize. I'm a current student at Oxford. I study English and Spanish, and I'm also learning Galician on the side. And really it's picking up Galician in my second year that has really shown the range of things you can do with a language, because it went from being a thing that I was just studying for interest to me actually living in Galicia, in Santiago de Compostela, last year for my year abroad. And there you see how, when you're exposed to it every day, a language just comes alive.
My name is Anders, and I'm currently a second-year undergraduate at the University of Oxford studying Spanish and Portuguese. I grew up bilingual. I spoke English and Cantonese, and so I've always really appreciated the diversity and the multiculturalism that language learning has to offer.
I was a judge for the Key Stage 1 and 2. I have judged translation contests before, but working on the Stephen Spender Prize was so enjoyable that it didn't feel like working at all. Reading these translations of poems reminded me of the magic of literature and poetry. I discovered so many beautiful new poems and rediscovered familiar ones. I especially remember reading poems translated from languages like Sanskrit and Farsi, languages that I knew nothing of.
This year, I had the honour of serving as a final judge for the Schools Laureate Prize at Key Stage 3. What impressed me most of the entries that I read was the sheer boldness in the range of languages represented. It was remarkable to see such linguistic diversity, especially from state schools, and to read translations from languages far beyond the norms taught in classrooms today. Of the entries I selected as winners, translations from Catalan, Bengali and German, what struck me most was how naturally they read in English. They didn't feel like translations of foreign poems, but as if they'd been originally crafted in English.
It's just so impressive to read a huge variety of entries for Key Stage 4, and all with such a high quality. It was. I know everyone says this, but it was really difficult to choose between. And it comes across especially well in the commentaries, which is one of my favourite elements of the prize, because as well as these beautifully translated poems, you also get a sense of each translator's personality coming through in the commentary, in picking out exactly what interests them, or their personal engagement with the language.
It was really hard to sign the winners because There were so many excellent translations and commentaries that found creative ways to deal with rhyme scheme, with form, and especially with the many foreign cultural concepts that these texts present. But the winning entries really stood out to me because of how much they paid attention to perspective.
Because you chose to participate in this contest, because you translated a poem, I got to explore the beauty of literature and language once more, and I was reminded of how precious and fascinating languages are. So thank you, and please never stop loving languages and poetry.
To this year's winners, my heartfelt congratulations. You've shown not only creative talent, but determination and vision. I hope this achievement serves as a stepping stone on your journeys with translation and with languages. Stay curious and let your passion for languages and translation guide you far and wide. But for now, celebrate this amazing achievement with us and with all of your loved ones.
So, again, wonderful work from everyone, and a huge congratulations to all of the winners, to all the entrants, and to all the commendees, because you've all shown exactly the ways that everyone can get engaged with the language in different ways. So all the best of luck to you in your future language studies, and I really hope you carry it on for as long as you can.
Keep pursuing your passion for languages because you never know where it may take you. Throughout my time at university, I've considered becoming a translator, a publisher, a curator, and I'd say with a languages degree or like with language learning in general, the world really is your oyster. So go ahead and go take advantage of it.
Thank you so much to our judges, not only for all the work, even though apparently it was so enjoyable that it didn't feel like work, but nonetheless, we know how much went into that. Thank you for the work and also for those fantastic videos. I wish to bottle everything that was just said about what languages bring to us throughout our lives, and I'm so pleased to hear that from you all. We're moving from students now back to teachers. So we've long been aware of the central role that teachers play in creating opportunities like the Stephen Spender Prize for their pupils. And we've been working hard in recent years to recognise and support this. One of the things that we do is to commend teachers for outstanding commitment to the prize, which means that they've engaged large numbers of pupils in the activity of creative translation. We also recognise that this isn't a one-way street, that teachers enjoy the opportunity to be creative themselves, but may not have so many opportunities to do so. So we introduced a strand of the prize that's open to all teachers at schools that have entered pupils. It's important as well for teachers to model that creativity, to show their pupils that being creative, that reading widely, and talking about poetry and translating is not something that stops when you leave school. So I'm really pleased to announce the winners of these two awards. Firstly, the Outstanding Teacher Awards, and then secondly, the Teacher Laureate winners. Our outstanding teachers this year are Esther Prentice Nielsen from the City of Derby Academy, Eloisa Maldonado and colleagues from Perrins School in Hampshire, and Michelle Massey and colleagues from the Blue Coat School in Oldham. Well done to you all for engaging so many of your pupils and taking such a dynamic approach to the prize. We really appreciate it. Our Teacher Laureate Prize winners then are teachers who themselves have translated poems and entered them into the Teacher Laureate category. And we have one winner and two runners-up. Our winner is Elena Bossi from Dixon's Sixth Form Academy in Bradford. And our two highly commended translators are Ruby Kelman from Holy Rood Roman Catholic High School in Edinburgh, and Yashasvi Arun Kumar from Westcliff High School for Boys in Essex. We're now going to have the opportunity to hear from these teachers and teacher translators themselves in videos they have recorded. Thank you all.
Hello, I'm Eloisa Maldonado from Perrins School in Oxford. I'm absolutely delighted to accept the Outstanding Teacher Commendation Award from the Stephen Spender Trust. Thank you so much for this recognition. I was very fortunate to see the spark in my students when translating the chosen poems and the enthusiasm when learning Spanish and French in a creative way. Thank you again to the Stephen Spender Trust for this commendation.
Hello, my name is Michelle Massey and I am Head of German at the Blue Coat School in Oldham. As a state school with over 90% of our students taking a foreign language at GCSE, we really value the Stephen Spender Prize and its inclusivity, with guidance on how to approach creative translation and resources to explore this in depth with our young people in the classroom. I'm delighted to accept this award on behalf of the MFL team at the Blue Coat School, and we thank you for the hard work put in to capture the imagination of all of our students.
My name is Elena and I translated a poem from Spanish.
My name is Yashasvi Arun Kumar and I translated a poem from Tamil.
My name is Ruby Kelman and I translated a poem from French.
I chose to translate this poem because it is about Don Quixote de la Mancha, a humorous fictional character emblematic in Spanish culture and beyond.
I chose this poem's song because as a singer myself, I was curious about how a song would translate into another language, and I wanted to experiment with the structure.
I decided to translate this poem because I was interested in its themes of walking and being in the outdoors.
No one else. Like a voice that echoes in a lonely hall with no one else. From some place unknown, you play my soul, faithfully yours, my heart.
Woman walking. Life is made of mountains, of unexpected drops, of infinite waterfalls, of sublime vertical landscapes, of eternal sunsets.
Portrait by Felipe Munita. Once upon a time, the knight of the woeful countenance galloped so many pages across many romantic novels. He began to believe unreservedly that his life was one of the stories in his huge library.
Thank you all. It is fantastic to see such range as well from the teachers, and just makes me think how lucky those pupils are to be in those classrooms. But also I think it's important to note that those few teachers that we've seen on screen represent the really large and dynamic community of teachers that are now engaging in the Stephen Spender Prize every year. Some of them will be in the room this evening or watching afterwards, and we're so grateful to all of you for everything you do to bring this activity to your pupils and to work so collaboratively with us. We are continuing to talk about teachers now, I'm pleased to say, and to think about how the work that we do with teachers extends beyond the prize, really into every aspect of our education work. And one particularly important and increasingly important aspect of this is continuing professional development or professional learning for teachers, which is an area that we're developing quite significantly. So to talk about this, I'm very pleased to be joined by Stacey Allen. Stacey leads all of our education programs at the Stephen Spender Trust, and we're going to talk a little bit now about our recent work with teachers in England via a project called Young Creative Translators that we have developed in partnership with the National Centre for Writing in Norwich. Welcome, Stacey. Thank you very much for joining us. Could you start by telling us a little bit about Young Creative Translators and how it all works?
Yeah. So the Young Creative Translators program is now in its third year. So we'll be training the third cohort of teachers in January 2026. And the program has two main parts. The first is the continuing professional development for teachers, which happens on one day in January at the start of the spring term. And on that day, the teachers will be introduced to our creative translation approaches, both by experiencing creative translation for themselves. So they'll be active participants in workshops, because we really believe one of the best ways of showing the impact of what we do is through participation and through exploring the pedagogical ideas behind what we do. After that first CPD day, the teachers then go back into their schools with a suite of 6 resources, which were developed by a suite of 6 activities, which were developed by a translator, Ruth Amazai Kemp, and they're based on a Portuguese picture book and a Portuguese poem, both from Brazilian Portuguese. And the teachers deliver that series of activities over 6 sessions, or they might do, there is some flexibility, so they might do it over fewer sessions. And those activities take them through the step-by-step scaffolded model, which we call Decode, Translate, Create. By the end of it, their pupils will have translated a picture book and a poem from Brazilian Portuguese. And I think the thing to say here is that we're working at Key Stage 2, largely in the lower part of Key Stage 2, so Year 3, Year 4, as well as some teachers in Year 5 and Year 6. And by the end of going through those activities, those pupils at that age will be able to translate those 2 texts, but also create things, new creations, written creations, or maybe artistic creations themselves.
Thank you. Yeah. And the picture book is such a beautiful work in itself, isn't it? It's really the resources are visually really appealing, and we've seen their popularity develop. You mentioned it's the 3rd year of the project, so could you say a little bit about how it's developed during that time and what's coming next?
Yeah, so throughout year 2 of the program, we had an increased number of teachers involved, which means there's more pupils who are accessing creative translation. The program also expanded to other areas of Norfolk, including Great Yarmouth, and a small program there which took the initiative even further, and we'll be hearing more about that later on in the event. And I think as you'll see, what happened in Great Yarmouth, it really shows how what we do is really a springboard for the young people's own creativity. Moving into Year 3 and beyond, we're looking at ways we can consolidate this work to reach more teachers, but also expand it to include more languages. And so our aim for this year is to add a new language, and in particular add a language which is from a language which is a home, heritage, or community language.
Sounds very exciting, and I think the feedback that we've had from teachers talks about how joyful the program is, how much the sort of range of their pupils really engage with it, doesn't it? And how pupils who might not otherwise be engaged in this sort of activity, who might not be keen readers, keen writers, are really kind of sparked by this project, which makes me think about recent news that we've been hearing about decreases in the numbers of young people across the UK who report that they read for pleasure, and that there's a new government-led campaign to try to address this, with next year being named the National Year of Reading. And you and I have been thinking a little bit about how we can connect up what we're doing with that national initiative. How do you see young creative translators connecting up with that National Year of Reading?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that Young Creative Translators is part of the National Centre for Writing's World of Words programming. So it's very much squarely in that domain of literature and literacy. So it's very much about core skills of reading, and I would say writing as well, because they do really go hand in hand. Translation itself is an act of reading, and it's often said to be the closest form of reading. And I think that really aligns with how this campaign is imagining reading. The slogan is go all in, and translation in that sort of really deep engagement that you have with the text. It's a really deep form of reading, and it allows someone who's the person who is translating to explore that text further on a deeper level and to, I guess, go all in. And I think translating collectively in a classroom is a way of reimagining reading. And I think that's another aim of the program, to reimagine the ways that we read. And through young creative translators, reading is reimagined as a very participatory activity. It's reimagined as a way, as an activity where you discuss the text, where you share ideas, where you take inspiration. So it really is a different way of seeing reading. However, I think one of the things that the campaign potentially overlooks is the fact that the UK has a rising generation of young people. So there are around 20% of primary school pupils who speak other languages, which potentially means that there are 20% of primary school pupils who can potentially read in other languages. And that's not really explicitly mentioned in the campaign. And I think this is where young creative translators and indeed all of our programs come in, because it enables young people, it empowers young people to read and engage with texts in other languages. And what we want to do for schools that aren't directly involved in our programming, we want to ensure that they can facilitate that for their pupils, their students as well. So we're going to set up a webpage of curated resources that are really going to encourage reading texts in other languages.
Excellent. Thank you. I think this leads on really nicely to the video that we're going to watch next, which is a teacher from White Woman Lane School in Norwich, Natalie Deligiani. She talks about the school being, or shows that the school is one that's really keen to support their pupils to read diverse international literature. And we've extremely enjoyed working with Natalie and her colleagues, and look forward to developing that. So you're going to hear a little bit from Natalie now about her experience of young creative translators.
I took part in the training with a colleague. I work in a junior school in Norwich, and the training itself was fantastic. It made a non-language specialist like me feel confident to approach translating a whole book with my class, a really achievable thing. The materials that we received were really comprehensive, and it meant that we could also pass this on to our third colleague back in school. I love the fact that when we were back in the classroom, this translation project levelled the playing field with all of the children. We were all doing this new thing together, me included. And children from different backgrounds could also bring in their own languages in the initial stages. We could look at different languages with all sorts of different scripts. We could work collaboratively and produce this joint translation at the end. The picture book itself was incredibly beautiful, and the children loved reading the pictures initially. I myself am a total champion of using picture books with children of all ages, and I really enjoy the fact that I can now use picture books that are written in a different language to something that I can share with the children. The children also really enjoyed writing poetry as a follow-on and performing it to each other in front of the class. One child was so inspired by our work in the classroom using this book that he started using a well-known language learning app to start learning more Portuguese at home, which I found really wonderful. We all really enjoyed teaching it, and the children really got a lot from the project as well. So this year it's now been written into our Year 4 curriculum, linking with our geography work on Brazil. And I would really like to extend it further so that every year group in our junior school has a different book or a different language to translate. So over the course of the 4 years, they've managed to translate 4 different books into English, which would be a wonderful legacy.
Thank you so much, Natalie. I feel like I could spend this entire event just talking about how much I love that video and how it fits so well with what we're trying to do with our creative translation work with schools. I love the fact that Natalie introduces herself as a non-language specialist, but talks about how this made it possible to work with her pupils on a picture book in a language that none of them knew, and that idea of we're all doing this new thing together, including the teacher. That's so important to us, that aspect. And then the fact that they're integrating it into the curriculum as a geography topic rather than as a languages topic, I think is just absolute music to my ears. So thank you so much, Natalie, and your colleagues for that brilliant work. And as I said, we're really, really looking forward to continuing to work with you and bringing more books in more languages to your pupils. Okay, we're moving on now to introduce a very new chapter in our creative translation work. This is a new project that is happening in Wales with a grant from the Welsh Government. So this spring, we were thrilled to receive funding from the Welsh Government for a new project that is all about supporting teachers in Wales to bring literature into the international languages classroom. This is a 3-year project called Literature Fires the Imagination, because Literature Fires the Imagination is a key statement in the new curriculum for Wales. And it includes a series of professional learning courses for teachers, as well as a collection of tools that are based around texts in different languages. So teachers will be able to come to the professional learning sessions and then have tools at their disposal to adapt for their particular settings, for their particular pupils. The tools that we develop are going to be in the languages that are taught in those schools, but also in home, heritage and community languages. And what's really been really exciting for us about this project is that it's grown very organically out of discussions with teachers and those involved in initial teacher education in Wales, including Kerry Bevan, who I mentioned earlier on as having joined our team. And those teachers helped us see that the new curriculum for Wales is incredibly well suited to creative translation. In fact, it sometimes feels when you're reading about the curriculum that you're reading a description of a creative translation workshop. We've developed the project through consultation with those teachers and adding new teachers into the community. And of course, those teachers and teachers throughout the UK are our best advocates. We know that information about our work spreads far better via word of mouth than by any other means. And so we're really pleased that some of the teachers that we're working with in Wales have offered to make short videos for their peers to encourage their fellow teachers to get involved with Literature Fires the Imagination. And we decided to show one example to you this evening. So you're about to see a video made by Kerry Bosley from Crickhowell High School in Powys. And here she reflects on her experiences of trialling our creative translation techniques with her students.
Bore da, bonjour, buenos dias, guten tag. What if learning a language could unlock creativity, confidence, and cultural understanding? What if every learner, regardless of ability, could access the beauty of literature in different languages? That's what creative translation offers. I'm Kerry Bosley, Director of Learning and Achievement for International Languages and Cymraeg at Crickhowell High School. I also work across Powys supporting primary and secondary teachers with languages. Today, I want to share why creative translation is such a powerful tool and motor for inclusion, and why you should bring it into your classroom. So what is creative translation? Well, it isn't just about converting words from one language to another. It's about making meaning personal. Using the Stephen Spender Trust's scaffolded approach, decode, translate, create, learners start by exploring a text, then translating it, and finally creating their own version. Here's the best part. It works for those with little or no knowledge of the source language. So ask yourself, how often do we give learners the chance to be truly creative in language learning? I've seen the impact firsthand. I introduced creative translation using 2 foreign language poems. With glossaries and the decode, translate, create method, something amazing happened. Learners produced original, self-authored translations, personalised, powerful and full of meaning. Confidence soared, creativity flourished, the results were outstanding, and the joy in the room, unforgettable. Learners weren't just translating, they were expressing themselves, finding their voice in another language. So why does this matter? Because creative translation develops critical thinking, communication and creative expression. It raises aspirations, builds confidence and helps learners see the world through new perspectives. In a time when cultural understanding is more important than ever, creative translation is a powerful way to foster cultural capital, connecting communities, celebrating identity and nurturing an appreciation of the richness of different cultures. Isn't that what education is all about? The training is accessible, practical and inspiring. If you want to bring creativity, culture and confidence into your classroom, I really would recommend that you get involved.
Thank you so much, Kerry, for that fantastic video. Couldn't have put any of it better myself, and I particularly loved that moment. Confidence soared, creativity flourished. Those two really, really important elements for any young person, whatever they're doing or might want to go on to do, and so compelling to hear your experiences. And again, Kerry, we're really, really looking forward to continuing to work with you and your colleagues across Wales on that project. So we heard earlier on from Natalie about young creative translators and the Portuguese focus that Stacey talked about with the picture book and the poem being Brazilian Portuguese. One of the reasons for that is that Portuguese is at the moment our spotlight language. So a few years ago, we introduced a spotlight strand to the prize, which focuses on a language that's spoken widely in the UK. This is the second year of our Portuguese focus, and it recognises the great rise in the numbers of Portuguese speakers across the UK, especially in our schools, and the way that they enrich UK culture and society. The way that this particular strand of the prize works is that entrants are invited to choose a poem from a specially curated booklet that features poems from a range of Portuguese translation specialists. Many of these poems were generously donated by the poets themselves and had never previously been translated into English. This year, with the support of more poets and Lusophone translation colleagues, we were thrilled to create an extended version of the Spotlight booklet that features poems from even more regions of the Portuguese-speaking world, spanning from Portugal to Brazil, Goa, Angola and Mozambique. I am delighted to welcome to the screen Georgia Nasser, who has been our judge for the Spotlight this year. Hi Georgia, good to see you. Georgia and I first met through our work with languages and translation at Oxford University, where Georgia was until relatively recently. And Georgia, we're so thrilled that you've joined us for the first time as a judge of the Portuguese Spotlight this year. I know, Georgia, that you've been working for many years on taking Portuguese out beyond the walls of the university and are continuing to do that in your new role at Cambridge. Could you tell us a little bit about that work, please?
Yeah, I mean, with Portuguese, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I mean, this is such a thrilling experience, but with Portuguese, we face the challenge of not having the language taught in schools, even though it's an incredibly popular language in the UK with so many speakers and numbers still rising. So we have a particular challenge, and it's been such an interesting challenge, but also a space for thinking creatively about how we actually think about Portuguese as a super interesting language to learn in the 21st century. So coming from Oxford, having worked, for example, in programs like Think Like a Linguist at the Wadham College's Modern Languages Summer School, and now in Cambridge at King's College, working as the Outreach Fellow for MML in our college, thinking about the ways in which our residentials, our programs can also take not only, the languages that are already taught in schools, but also languages that open up completely different aspects of the world. So Portuguese, I always find it so interesting that we obviously associate, because of the name, Portugal. But then when you actually look at the map of the Portuguese-speaking world, it's spoken in pretty much every single continent, and 90% of its speakers are outside of Europe. So it actually puts pressure on the category of a European language. So what does it mean to speak Portuguese nowadays? And so it's so interesting that you can actually have so many different kinds of Portuguese from Brazil, from Angola, from Macau, that take on the histories of how these languages have developed. So this has been so fascinating to work in so many different capacities with students from so many different levels over all of these years. And for me as a Brazilian, it's incredibly it's incredibly enriching to see how people connect with my native language in the UK.
Thank you so much. So I think you said a little bit already about what it was like to judge. Could you tell us a bit more about that experience this year?
Yeah, I mean, the entries were incredible. Again, the booklet that was put together, I think, really offered a huge variety of poems to be translated. And it's so interesting to see which one the translators kind of drifted towards. I was especially excited by the creative responses, whether they were reflections, thinking about their translational decisions, which is something I do in my own translation classes with my students at university, but also the kinds of drawings. We had paintings, we had performance, we had new poems that were generated out of the experience of translating. So seeing the ways in which different kinds of interpretation emerged from the process of translation was specifically interesting to me, and the ways in which different translators actually brought in their other kinds of talents, their other kinds of skills to bear on their personal responses was really meaningful to me. So being able to see the range of responses to poetry that is written in Portuguese originally, either from Brazil or Portugal or Angola, but to see them being kind of then relived through the eyes of a student was really fascinating.
Thank you, Georgia. And I'm glad that you enjoyed it so much. Your enjoyment is very palpable. Could you tell us a little bit about some of the entries that caught your attention this year?
Yeah, I mean, I would start with our KS1 to 2 entry by Semeli, who translated a Brazilian poem called Merci. And this, for me, encapsulated what creative translation makes possible. Whether or not you speak or have any knowledge of the language, it has that sense of agency. So reading that translation, you could feel the confidence in the student's voice, actually being able to depart from the original and actually take a lot of risks in moving away from the words on the page to actually privilege different kinds of things like sound, like image. So that was particularly fascinating to see how confidence is able to be built through providing a translator with the agency to do whatever they want with that poem. I'd also mention Isabelle from KS3, who translated a Brazilian poem called Primavera, Spring. This is a poem that is made up of several haikus, and with haikus you have this kind of vivacity of images, which were so elegantly translated into English as well. Not a particularly easy poem to translate. So again, interesting to see how different translators challenged themselves by choosing poems that were very specifically targeting particular kinds of form, particular kinds of meter. I would also say with KS4 to 5, there were two particular entries that really stuck with me. One was Rebecca's Naquela Manhã, that morning. Here, again, one of these examples where the reflection, the response was so interesting. So Naquela Manhã, that morning, describes a particular morning in the subject's life. And the creative response was actually a continuation of that poem. It was that afternoon. So an imagining of what that day could actually look like. And it was incredibly heartfelt, looking at not only the structure, but the images that were already used in the first poem, and then kind of developed further, reimagined, enlivened further in the creative response. And I would also mention Marco's translation of Mar Português. Again, not an easy poem, written by Fernando Pessoa, one of the biggest names in Portuguese language literature. And thinking about this idea of the Portuguese Sea, I was particularly struck by the reflection to this poem, because the translation actually stood out as a work of interpretation. And that reflection made it clear to me. And it goes to show that translation is itself an interpretive act. And that's through the challenges that creative translation actually poses to us, it makes us so much better readers. So that was incredible to read and to see how the process of translating a poem in a language you might not know actually gives you such a profound understanding of what that poet might have been trying to say back in 1924, for example. So it was really interesting, but the range and the quality of the entries was incredible.
Thank you so much. I imagine that you have inspired everybody in this room to go and read those poems, and the link is there in the chat. What really came through for me there, Georgia, was, I mean, you talked about risk taking, and you know, sort of what a courageous act it is to translate a poem of any, you know, of any kind of history or heritage, and that's, you know, something to celebrate in itself. Just even starting to translate is a real achievement. So hopefully all of your appetites have been whetted now to see these translators in action. We're going to now watch a short video with the winners and commendees from the Portuguese Spotlight. Thank you so much, Georgia.
My name is Senelli, and I translate a poem from Portuguese to English.
My name is Xavier, and I translated my poem from Portuguese to English.
My name is Rebecca, and I translated a poem from Portuguese.
I really like this poem because it describes the sea as a natural habitat where many creatures live.
I like the poem because it was interesting. I liked the way how it sounded.
When I read through the Portuguese Spotlight booklet, this poem stood out to me because of the simplicity and beauty with which it presents almost unspeakable grief.
Sea. In the sea, crabs and oysters, shellfish and lobsters, beautiful creatures, weird beasts with odd features, roam free.
That Morning by Maria Zenia. A train was passing. The rails chanted angel names, exhaling the myrrh of myrtle oil, carrying my tears bathed in gold.
Thank you to all of those fantastic winners for sharing their poems with us. I'm particularly impressed this year by all of the settings that our winners have chosen to record those videos. I feel like everybody's really gone above and beyond with that. So we're now into the final stages of this evening's event. The final thing we want to share with you stays with Portuguese and with our Spotlight activity. So you've heard from Georgia about the Spotlight Prize. What we've done is, over the years, sought to bring that Spotlight language into the work that we do with schools more directly as well. And we had a really great experience of that this year, both through young creative translators that you heard about from Stacey and Natalie earlier on, and then as part of that, through a partnership with Enjoy Great Yarmouth and their project Enjoy, Learn and Prosper, which is bringing creative activities to young people in Great Yarmouth. And we partnered with them on Young Creative Translators to bring the activity of creative translation and that Portuguese picture book and poem to to young people in a primary school in Great Yarmouth. So we're now going to look at a short slideshow, which is going to show, firstly, how those pupils in Great Yarmouth were inspired to unleash their artistic talents and to design zines that were based on the texts that they explored during the project. And those were shared at a special exhibition earlier this month. And those photos are joined by a showcase of the visual responses that were submitted by entrants to this year's and last year's Portuguese Spotlight Prize. So Georgia talked about those creative responses and that being a really important part of the judging experience for her. So we're going to be treated to some of those illustrations now. Thank you, everyone. That feels like such a wonderful way to close this evening. So amazing to see, again, just such a range of responses and such talent and creativity and imagination and courage. Thank you all. Thanks, everybody, for these fantastic contributions. It's been such a pleasure for me to see all of this come together on one screen, and I hope you've all enjoyed it as much as I have. I'm now really pleased to invite Rebecca Hart to join us. Rebecca is co-chair of trustees at the Stephen Spender Trust and is just going to say a few words to close this evening. Thank you all.
Thanks, Charlotte. Good evening, everyone. As Charlotte said, my name's Rebecca Hart and I'm the co-chair of the Stephen Spender Trust. I'm really honoured to be taking over the position of chair of the Trust in the new year, following in the footsteps of Jonathan Haywood. Jonathan has steered the Trust since 2017 and now feels like a really appropriate moment to thank him for his brilliant leadership and enthusiastic passion for the work of SST for the past 8 years. Thank you, Jonathan. This is my third Stephen Spender Prize celebration event, and they're always incredibly moving and inspiring, and this evening has been no exception. I really enjoyed hearing about the reasons why students enjoy translating, and like unexpected sentiments like spending time with family or celebrating languages that mean something to their families, and just the challenge of it. As Charlotte said, tonight is an important tonic to the times we are living in and a moment to pause and to really celebrate multilingualism, internationalism, and creativity. So congratulations to you all. On behalf of the trustees, I would like to acknowledge and give our thanks to some key people who've really made tonight happen. The funders and the partners of the prize and our education programs, the judges, Tahir Adel, Georgia Nassa, Josephine Krupa, Patrick Lynch, Bryony Fishpool, and Anders Hay. Thank you to all of those who participated in the prize, in particular the winners and the commended, and all those supporting them, especially their teachers. The entire SST team, Rosie Eyre, who has coordinated tonight's entire event, also Bradley Walters, who produced all the video content, and Stacey Allen, who coordinates all our work in schools, and of course, Charlotte Ryland, whose vision drives the work of the Trust forward and who has hosted us brilliantly this evening. I'm pleased to say that if you would like to re-watch tonight's event or hear more of the translations we're celebrating, there's plenty of content available to share with family, friends, colleagues, and students. A recording of this evening's event will soon be available via the Stephen Spender Trust YouTube channel. Full versions of all of the readings from this year's winners and commendees will also be available to watch on the Stephen Spender Trust YouTube channel in the coming weeks. And the winning translations will also be published on our website. Please don't forget to sign up to the SST mailing list for news of next year's prize and the Trust's other activities. And to close, we have a special ending for you all tonight. We will now be joined by many of our winners, commendees, judges, and the SST team to close this event with thank yous in many languages. We know that we have at least 18 languages amongst our winners, so please see how many you can identify. Thank you.
3, 2, 1.
شكرا.
Gracias. Oh my goodness, that was absolutely wonderful.